So, Chuck, when I say the word Tevis, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
One tough ride.
I've told people for years that Tevis was like a drug, and that it's one of those events that once you do it, you either are totally hooked or you'll never touch it again. And it's it's the kind of thing that it has so much magic to it and so much energy on its own. It's almost like it's like a live organism, from the time it begins and the time it ends, from late Thursday night till late Sunday evening. There's just this time warp that exists. It's called the Tevis.
You know, I thought you'd probably say a lot of work because of how much effort you've put in, especially the last 7 years as ride director. Um,
It's tough to put the ride on. It's tough to enter the ride and get your horse to the starting line sound. It's tough to get it through the ride and finish. It's tough if you get pulled, especially if you get pulled at the finish line. This is a tough ride in any aspect of it. If you're not looking for a tough ride, come crew it for somebody and get used to it that way.
yeah. One thing that's interesting is I've done in doing these interviews has been how much ride and tie has been an influence on endurance riders getting more involved in transitioning from endurance or from ride and tie to endurance, and then eventually riding Tevis. And you're one of those people where ride and tie was your first experience in long distance horse racing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your first experiences doing ride and tie.
All the way through grade school, junior high and high school, I ran cross country and track. And as I became a senior in high school, I heard about this crazy Levi race that's coming to Sonoma, which I graduated from Sonoma High School in '71. And so I had always liked horses, I always liked riding, but I had owned one for about 6 months when that race came around. And I said, I'm going to do that race, especially because my best friend and running partner in school was probably the best runner that's ever gone through Sonoma High School, distance runner. And but back in those days, they said you couldn't do it because of AAU rules, because there was money paid out to the people.
Right.
And so my best runner said, not this year. I can't do it. I'm still pre-Olympic kind of stuff, AAU. And so I got a different partner, and we did it. And we finished third, and I was hooked. And I loved every aspect of it. Yes.
So what kind of horse did you use on your first?
Probably
first
a
ride?
mostly thoroughbred grade horse. That he was expensive. He was $105 in those days, and bought him from the horseshoer, and the horseshoer shot him for that price.
Yeah.
And he gave us everything he had. When the three of us were wiped out after that first race. I think it was 27 miles, but it was up and down, and it was hot, and there was not very much water, and only one check halfway through, and it was a tough run.
Well, what's interesting about ride and tie, to me, and we talked about this earlier before we came on camera, is how did Bud Johns, who was the ride director, and it was his brainchild to put this event on, how did he do the marketing to get people to even be interested in doing this incredible event where there's two runners, one horse, and he had he obviously heard about there's folklore about the Indians, Native Americans. This is how they traveled from point A to point B and that kind of stuff. How did he get people to even want to be a part of this?
That's a good question. I've heard people discuss this around the campfire for years, and then nobody has the exact answer. But when Levi Strauss puts on an event, they put on a first-class event, and then they're coming to put on a cross-country race, and here's something that was a different kind of event for cross-country type runners and riders. And so there was actually a demand for something there. And you know, it appealed to cowboys, it appealed to long-distance runners, it appealed to endurance rider types. So there were quite a few groups that came together that was interested in participating.
Just doing it. And so what do you think the big influence has been with ride and tie and then modern day endurance?
Well, people who did ride and tie, it's a shorter, faster sport. Most of the people that have gone into endurance wanted to know more about long distance riding and competitions. There are more chances to compete in endurance than there was in ride and tie, and it's a little different sport. It's similar, but it's different. And so when you start studying the long distance horse and using them in these kind of competitions, you gravitate to the longer stuff, and pretty soon you're doing a 50-mile ride and then maybe a 100-mile ride eventually.
Then Tevis is the goal.
You know, and ride and tie people are tough-minded people, and they don't shy away from the toughness of it. They enjoy that part of it, you know. And so if they do their homework, they become successful endurance riders, and then eventually successful Tevis riders.
So you probably, I mean, you were saying that you didn't even know really much about endurance. You just heard about this event and said, I'm going to do this.
Absolutely. The ride and tie, I felt like I was in command and knew what I was doing and knew how hard to push the horse and how hard to push ourselves and what we needed to be successful. And then 2 or 3 months after the first ride and tie, I went and did my first 50-miler.
Okay.
And I think we rode for 4 hours, and they said, you're at the first vet check. and we trotted the whole way, and there was no water for the horse for that whole section. It was a Tri-Cities ride. And and I said, let me out of this sport. My horse is done, I'm done, and I'm glad to go home.
Yeah, because you were training for speed.
But it was just something I had never really done. I didn't have a real mentor yet,
Right.
and I didn't know if I was training right or if you know, we were suited for it. But it was tough for me that day, and you know, I had an old thoroughbred type horse, and because we had been successful on the ride and tie, I expected to be somewhat successful there.
We were going through photos, you know, prior to sitting here on, you know, looking for a backdrop for us, and you said, I want this backdrop because this is Bob Marks.
No, it isn't. I think that's John McCullough.
Or John McCole, I'm sorry.
It could be Bob Marks, but I think it's John McCullough.
It's John McCullough.
Okay.
And so, you know, and you said that he was a big influence on you. And so maybe you can kind of share a little bit about that influence that he had.
Well, after I shared that first experience on Tri-Cities rides with my sister, who worked in Santa Rosa, she worked with a guy that was in the equities business, and he would talk to John McCullough all the time about riding, and Joe and John and Kerry Ridgway were the three that rode together all the time from Santa Rosa. And so those three said, hey, if you you know, get your horse ready, and we're going to go do the Nugget ride,
Right.
and we'll come by Sonoma and get you. And that meant they slowed down and honked as they went by on the highway. And then we followed them to the next ride, and you know, at least we had somebody to answer questions for us.
Right.
I got pulled on that ride, but it was in the second vet check. So
you made it.
yeah, I made it twice as far. You know.
So, you know, moving forward and your experiences and getting to, you know, on up to Tevis, what was your first year riding Tevis?
I think my first year was probably 1974.
What do you remember most about that particular ride, your first Tevis?
I knew Gordie Ainsley from Ride and Tie, and he was trying to run it that year, and I thought, you know, how's he going to run all the way to Auburn? But he pulled it off, and it was pretty impressive. But we were focused on riding it, and got through and got our buckles, and we were riding pretty athletic and fit horses, and we took our time doing it, you know. And I thought if we can do this at a slower speed, we could come back later and try to go faster if we wanted to. And
that was Pam, you and Pam.
Pam and I rode, and we
wife.
rode together all the time. Yeah.
And you know what one of the things I have tremendous respect for you is because you raised your family in this sport and really around the Tevis, and your two daughters have done this ride multiple times. and you brought your family up in it. I mean, that must have been just an incredible way to raise your family and lifestyle you had, and still have.
The way Pam explained it was, she said, we're endurance riders, and to the girls, if you want an endurance ride, you go with us. If you're not, you're going to be bored because you can be with a babysitter.
Right.
And so they always, two girls, and they both wanted to ride, and Jennifer and Alyssa, and they both have, Jennifer has 7, and Alyssa has 10 buckles now.
She got her 10th buckle this year.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pam's got 11 buckles, So I started in on the crewing and working on the bog, and then managing the ride where they kept riding every year.
Yeah.
But one of my proudest moments was Alyssa finished when she was 12 years old, and I got to take her across the finish line. And that was, it was tough getting there. I mean, it was after 4 o'clock. It was not 5:15, but it was late. And that borders on child abuse. And so, but I have a photo of us both coming across the finish line, and we are so happy to get that done.
I bet. Well,
And
what an amazing experience to have.
And Pam brought Jennifer across when she was 12 years old. So
Yeah.
both girls finished, And looking back at it now, both of them say that was important to do it. At that time, none of us knew if they were ready, and they didn't know if they were ready. But you try it and you see how it comes out, and it was successful. That year that Alyssa finished with me, a horse named Spider, fell off of a switchback.
Oh, yeah.
Fell through the top of the trees and went right over the top of us. So we had to stop and make sure that we weren't underneath him, because we didn't know where he was going to land. But he went over our trail and landed in the brush downhill. That's one of those moments on Tevis that woke me up, and it scared me, because he could have landed right on top of the 3 of us.
Yeah.
Our horses just froze and let that go by, and we were shook up a little bit, but we rode on and had help come back, and that horse ended up being fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, how some of them have
It
survived
is
those
amazing.
falls.
It is amazing.
And you see them next year.
Yep.
The following year. So, you've taken on so many different roles involving in Tevis, from being from riding it to supporting your family doing it, being a bog member, Board of Governors. But 7 years ago, you took on one of probably the most important roles that Tevis has, which is as ride director. And what's interesting is your first year you take this job on was the year we had all the snows. We'd already
2011.
postponed the ride once, and then you had to change course. Maybe you can share some of the craziness that went on behind the scenes that we don't even know about.
Yeah, so the executive committee pretty much decided, Kathy Perry was president at the time, to move the ride to an October date. And because there was no ride on that weekend, it would work. And so we moved it to October. And the first part of October is almost always dry and not snow for sure. And a freak snowstorm came in. I mean, an early snowstorm came in and dumped a load of snow on the Sierras. And it hit 48 hours before the ride.
I was at Roby Park.
So Wednesday, Thursday type, yeah, exactly. And so on Thursday night, I drove up to Roby Park and was sitting in the snow looking at Squaw Valley, And we had about 8 people on the phone, executive committee members, and everybody had a job to do. And they said, do you think that the ride could go through that snow? And I said, somebody would get through, but could they get to Auburn from there? I don't think so. I'm sitting in 3 or 4 inches of snow here tonight, And there was no way that ride was going on. At the time, there was 18 inches of snow all the way through Squaw Valley. And so the decision was made, I didn't make the decision, I was listening to all these people on this conference call, that we'd turn the ride around, and if we rode it backwards, where would we go to? How would we get 50 miles? And if we turned around, how would we not run into each other and have single track trail with people going both ways? And that's where I thought the real genius of the ride came in, because people knew exactly how long it would take them to ride from here to there, and the last horse and the first horse. And because people have been putting on this ride for a long time, and they know this trail really well from Auburn.
It was an amazing ride. I rode it, and it was a great ride.
It was a great ride.
It was really fun.
There was no dust, and
Yeah.
there was a very few rocks because we had
Yeah.
groomed the bottom half of the trail.
It was everything that I trained.
That's right. That's right. So it was a lot of most riders, all riders that talked to me said that they were very glad that we went ahead and put it on. And
Well, that was it. You could have easily said, look, we can't do this.
Yes.
But there was so many people that everybody was ready for it.
Right.
And that, I thought that was one of those, I mean, to be able to just in 48 hours make something happen like that, I don't think that most people realize just how much work it is to just change everything and you guys pulled it off.
so
And-
Barbara White's the ride secretary, and she is, I've been around this a long time. She knows all the entities that need to know about the permitting process and stuff. But Pam, my wife, working on my side with me, was on the phone also and said, I need to change the data, the distance data for the ride. I need to change the vet check cards. I need to change all of this stuff and get it to people by Friday morning. And this is Thursday night that we're talking. So all night Thursday night, all that stuff got done. And by noon Friday, we were handing out their stuff, and they were in line at the fairgrounds. And I hadn't seen where we were going to start. I knew where it was, basically, and opening down in the recreation area.
What do you think, after having that as your first experience as ride director, but now you've put on, 6 other rides, and there's a lot of work. I know you're up in this area all the time having meetings. You were here, today for meetings. What is the most challenging part about taking on that job?
A big part of it is working with the entities, the Forest Service, the Park Service. It's working with the counties, mainly though the Park Service for ASRA and the Forest Service, because from year to year you have different personnel going through, and then they don't know the history of how much homework we do to make this right, because it's a year-long job for the bog to make sure the trail is open and usable and safe.
Yeah.
And we've put money and we've put time and we've put a lot of effort over the years. Somebody new comes in and they say, well, I have to do an environmental study to see if you can clear brush off a trail that shouldn't be on the trail. Between us and the run, we are the user groups that use that trail.
Yeah.
And so that's a grind. That's something that you do and you just grind. As you get closer to the ride, it becomes kind of fun because you get to talk to people that are going to ride the ride and that you've known, and horses that have grown up that you've seen, and you get to wish them well and see how they do. Sure.
Well, there's another part of your history, ride and tie, endurance, Tevis, and riding it and managing it. But you also have put out some good horses. I can think of 2 offhand, and that's Sax and Harry. And 2 Tevis winners, multi-Tevis winners, and Hagen Cup winners. What do you look for? Because you every time I see you, and your family, you always seem to be riding good-looking, big-bodied, big-boned horses. Where do you find them, and what do you look for? You probably got to say where you find them.
Well, we could probably have a whole discussion about that,
Yeah.
interviewing that in one night. But
And how did you learn that?
trial and error probably. But along with John McCullough and Joe Hampton and Kerry Ridgway had the eye for the horses. And I listened and I followed and I asked him, and then I thought, you don't know any more than anybody else. I mean, you know, but then when you look at the horse, everything's perfect except this.
Right.
So which horse do you go for? I went back to my feeling that the horse is an athlete. I mean, it's a tremendous athlete and an athletic endeavor that we're asking him to do, to carry us that far, 100 miles
It's
over a
amazing.
rocky, uneven,
Yeah.
up and down trail in the heat. And so you look for the most athletic horses. So you could look at the most perfect conformed horse and say that horse is dang near perfect, but I'd want to see him move. And so the way they move, do they carry themselves straight? Are they light on their feet? Are they athletic? Are they balanced? All of those things go into selecting a horse. And so the racehorse people have gotten to it a little faster than I think the other breeders, because they can prove the horse a little faster. And so a lot of the racehorse Arabian people, those horses have come on and been good endurance horses. Not all of them, but some of them. And
You can't measure heart. They gotta want to do it.
That's right. But a lot of that is in their bloodlines too.
Yeah, yeah, very, very true.
Yeah, not all of those beautiful horses were front-running endurance horses. But yeah, your percentage is going to go up if you pick an athletic horse.
Do you pick them out young, or are you?
Well, I'd rather pick out one 6 years old that's well broke and done some dressage, and just needs a big fat guy to ride him. And sometimes you do. When you see a horse that you like and it has the bloodlines that you like, and you think it's an athletic horse, and it's not being used, then you say, I don't want a 3-year-old horse, but sometimes you go for a 3-year-old horse because that's what you have to do. They're breeding many fewer horses in the Arabian breed now in the United States than they have in the past. I think the racehorse people have kind of saved the breed that way and given us some numbers of geldings. And so I think because of that, the racetrack people retire these 6, 7, 8-year-old horses. Maybe that's a good place to look. But when you're there looking at that racetrack, there may be a 3-year-old that they're not getting to or something that could be good for our sport.
Catches your eye.
Yeah.
So I asked Phil Gardner and Kathy Perry this question. I'll ask you, because you've been in this sport since the early 70s.
Right.
Do you think that the endurance horses in the earlier days of our sport were better than the horses we have today?
There were a few outstanding candidates. Wheat as a Reef, Donna Fitzgerald's horse, and Pat Fitzgerald had a couple. I think that those breeding of those Rush Creek and Hyannis horses,
The early days.
and some of those others from the early 70s, and I can't go back to the 60s, but in the 70s, some of those horses were fabulous. So I think the breeding is as good there. Maybe the racetrack people have put in a little more heart into some of these horses, but I don't know if we needed it because those records of those horses might not be duplicated.
Right.
And so that's all I can go on. I think the best horse that I ever had a chance to ride was Kerry Ridgway's horse, Rush Creek Flint, which was an Almira Night horse.
Yeah.
And I rode him on the riding tie a couple of times. He's 16-hand Arabian that had just a huge trot and just a big heart. And, Kerry rode him on the 78 Pony Express race,
Yeah.
And he rode him 65 miles a day for 11 days straight at the end of that ride. And he said Kerry and the horse probably went crazy in that part of the ride. I mean, those are feats. Winning the Tevis more than once is a feat that you have to recognize, that individual is a superior athlete.
Yeah.
And
I think Farwa's kind of
absolutely.
matching
No,
those things.
no, there are,
but
absolutely.
I think it's interesting because when I asked Kathy and Phil, I got 2 different answers.
Oh, wow.
Kathy felt that, and each one of them had an explanation that I went, okay, I understand why you feel that way, because I think that where we're going now is asking where the future of our sport is going, and where do you think the future of our sport is going, or where do you want to see the future of our sport going?
Well, our sport for the most part is a non-cash sport. It's a way of life.
Yeah.
So therefore, it doesn't drive the breeding industry. The cash sport for Arabians, athletic Arabians, is on the track, and what cash there is in that, and that sport drives the breeding. We're just very close to needing the same kind of horse, and so I don't know many people breeding Arabians for endurance. In the 70s, yes, there were.
They were.
I bred the Bezetal, our best mare. I bred the Bezetal down the road, and they produced fabulous horses. But Rush Creek's not doing it. The Hyannis is not doing it. I bought the last Hyannis horse, and they knew what they were breeding. They had great bloodlines, and they were raised out correctly, and they were difficult to break because they were a little bit wild, and they became great endurance horses. So we don't have as many of those. One of our best horses that we bought was named Harry. He came from the slaughterhouse in Oregon,
Yeah.
and went on to, win the Tevis Cup a couple times and get the Hagen Cup. And I heard Marcia Smith say that he won his last 5 rides that he did, and before he retired, and they were all 100-mile rides.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a tremendous, but we're pulling examples out of the lot. And are there more of them now, or were there more of them then? There were more horses to choose from then, and I think it's harder to find those good horses now because there just isn't as big a pool to pull from.
Yeah.
The horses haven't changed a whole lot. There are just fewer of them.
Just gotta look
And you got
harder.
to look harder and recognize them when you see them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
put the work into them.
Well, I think that, when we look at Tevis and the specific Tevis horse, there's a certain vision that we have, but we also see that there's all kinds of horses that do this ride, and it's probably good to see. We have gaited horses doing it now.
Absolutely,
We have
absolutely.
quarter horses, we have mules, we have lots of different horses that can do it, but in the competitive aspect, the Arab still dominates.
Absolutely.
So-
And that's what we were talking about. It's the top athlete in the sport. Is usually half or full-blooded Arab.
I think you're a good person to ask this question. For people that are thinking of using, to doing Tevis for the first time, and they have this goal that they've set, what is your, the biggest piece of advice you could give somebody that has those aspirations?
Get a mentor.
There you go.
So find somebody that's been successful and then emulate them. And follow them around without asking questions, and just open your eyes. We say, obre los ojos, and soak it in.
Yeah.
If you followed Kathy Perry around, or if you followed Barbara White around, you couldn't help but become a better horse person. And I mean, to this day, on whatever level you're at. And listen to people when they give a little talk like this, because they don't want to tell you how it is, because it may not always be that way, but they think that the key is, this certain thing, and they'll drop hints. And if you listen well enough to the people that have been successful, if you watch them close enough, it's all there. It's like an open book. So we used to come from Chico when we weren't riding Tevis, and we'd come watch them finish, and we'd watch those first horses come in. Whose horse looked good? Which rider looked good? It was a little bit of an Auburn sport at that time. That the people that lived in Auburn and trained in Auburn and knew the trail, it was an advantage, we felt like. And so when we first started riding, our goal was just to finish with a horse that looked good and felt good. And then we started to know the trail, and then we pretty soon knew what the horses needed, and electrolytes came along, and we knew how to use them. And those were big advantages to us. As a ride director, I have tried to open the Tevis up to people who don't live in Auburn and don't train on the trail, et cetera, to just people who want to come here with a good horse and test them on a difficult trail against great competition. And so we've put a little more water out now than there has been in the past. We've cleared some rocky stretches and made them, trails that you don't mind riding your good horse down.
Yeah.
And it's ongoing, but I think that's the mindset of the bog now, is to put on a world-class event. And you can't do that, especially on this trail, a one line through the Sierra Nevada Trail, without putting in a whole lot of work and some money. And people have been very generous with their donations. And our finance committee has done well at bringing up money to get help working on the trail and trying to maintain it as a world-class trail. And I think the trail's in better shape now than it's been,
It's
than when we started.
Yeah.
So John McCullough, my mentor up here, would tell me, Chuck, let's go over and ride the Tevis Trail. And then when we got there, he goes, tuck your reins into your belt and let's walk down this hill because we're going to throw rocks off. That was the trail committee in 1970s. I'm sure other people did it too, but John was on the bog and he was vice president at one time and very active in promoting the sport, and he had his 20 buckles. He probably has 5 of those on horses that we selected and had, and he bought from us. Kerry Ridgway borrowed ours a couple times. We borrowed his a couple times. It's just good to see good horses being used by people who know how to use them. Tom Christoph and Tony Benedetti nominated me for the board, and I was on the board of governors for a couple of years, and I didn't have a specific job, and I didn't know what the hell I was on there for. And I was becoming very frustrated. And Tom Christoph said, Tony, don't you think it's time for Chuck to step up and maybe be the ride director? Well, I didn't even know what the ride director did. And then once I was in the throes of it, I said, what the hell did you guys see in me to make me want to be the ride director? I mean, I still kind of wonder that, you know. And they go, Chuck, you have been to the big dance and seen, I think Tom Johnson said this, he was listening. He said, you've been to the big dance and you've seen how it's supposed to be, and you've been to the little one, and you're successful at going there and participating and coming back, and you enjoy that, and bring that enthusiasm, that enjoyment to the Tevis. And I thought, what the heck are they talking about? But in '97, Marcia had ridden our horse Harry on some FEI stuff. And so she had nominated me to be a selector for the '98 World Championship in Dubai. And so everybody got to go to Dubai and watch the U.S. team, and Valerie Canavy go there and defend her gold medal. And the U.S. had won the gold medal every year since 1980 in World Championships. And so, but we didn't get to go. Pam and I didn't get to go as a selector. For a year and a half, I'd been selecting this team of 6 horses. And I was attached to them. I said, I want to go to this thing. And so I told Pam, all we need to do is find a country that's not sending a team, and then get somebody from that country to ride our qualified horse, and we could ship the horse out over there. And the chef de quite doesn't need to be of that nationality. And she goes, you'll be the Bella Carosi of endurance riding. And so everybody kind of had a chuckle or something. And the next morning I went to work on it, and a friend of ours has a guy who's a very good athlete, but he's a big man. And I said, can you get Alfonso to ride our horse? And we would go to Dubai. And so we put together this team of 11 people, and it ended up 2 horses, and the horses shuffled a little bit. And we flew them to Dubai in '98. And so Jennifer, my daughter's horse, from her first Tevis finish, is the first horse to finish international competition for Mexico. So I had to fly to Mexico City, and they would write in Spanish to Alfonso, and then I'd have to get it interpreted, and it was legal documents that we were signing, and so we did that. And so while we're there, the vets are looking at our horse, and there's one top Mexican endurance vet, and he works in Dubai. And they say, oh no, you can't vet his horse. Kerry Ridgway, you have to vet his horse. because you're not from the same country.
And he was your vet.
And he was my vet back at home. And I mean, the stories go on. And we were of course, we finished late in the evening, which is probably 11:30 to midnight or something, where the horse actually finished. And they thought that was the tail end on this. And the horse looked good, but he still goes through the hospital, and then they transport him all for you. So Pam says, I'll stay behind, because you guys have done a great job with this part, and I'll bring the horses back to the stable. So I went to the stable and sat back, and the sun's coming up, and fell asleep in the car, and no Pam showing up with the horses. And so a couple of hours later, I hear Pam calls me, and she calls me from the Sheikh's house, and she said, we're driving out of there, and it's not even light yet, and the big horse van with 9 horses in it, and the Russian horses and all these other horses, and he drives right into a sand dune, because he can't see the road, the sand's across the road, so he just drives out there and he buried the van. And now we're sitting there, and they're saying, hey, we have a 24-hour quarantine on these horses, they have to be separated. And the head vet from the ride had just come along behind them and said, okay, we have to unload these horses, take them over to the Sheikh's house, we'll have tea while all the people jelly here are leading these horses around and watering your horse and taking care of your horse. And we thought we'd lost Pam and the horses for a long time. There are quite a few stories about that trip. And when I came back, I said, that was kind of a trial by fire.
Yeah.
Before you go to the vet, to the Tevis, and then the first year of Tevis, you have to turn around and run it backwards, you know. So, I mean, we could write a chapter in the book.
So you had lots of experience even before you started.
Yes.
Well, you've always been been able to handle situations, anyway, and so you've done a great job.
Yes, Pam's the organization behind what I do, for sure. I give her all the credit for that. But she says when the crap hits the fan, you're the guy that handles it the best. And so, yeah, I don't mind that part of it because I think we're well organized and we're ready to put the ride on by the time the ride gets here.
Chuck, I have to, it's been a labor of love, and I have to thank you for that because you and your family have had so much influence on this sport and on this ride, and it's a real honor to be sitting here with you and talking with you, and I can see the passion when you're talking, and I can see it in your eyes that you truly love this ride, and you love horses, and for that I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It was great to talk to you.
Absolutely. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay.